Elena Rodriguez quietly pushed her cleaning cart down the long hallway of Whitmore Music Academy. The wheels squeaked a little, but she had gotten used to that sound over the past 3 years. It was 7 p.m., and all the fancy students had gone home to their big houses. The teachers were packing up their music sheets and heading out to expensive restaurants. But Elena's day was just beginning. She stopped at the first practice room and pulled out her keys. The door opened with a soft click, and she stepped inside. Piano music was still hanging in the air, even though the room was empty. A young student had been practicing here just an hour ago, struggling with something that sounded complicated. Elena had heard every wrong note, every frustrated sigh through the thin walls. Elena picked up the music sheets scattered on the piano bench. Her eyes scanned the notes automatically, reading them like words on a page. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The student had been playing it all wrong, rushing through the gentle parts and stumbling over the runs. Elena could have shown him how to make it sing, but that wasn't her job. She was just the cleaning lady. She wiped down the piano keys carefully, one by one. These weren't just any pianos. They were expensive instruments that cost more than Elena. Made in 5 years. Her fingers lingered on the smooth white keys for just a moment before she moved on to dust the music stand. The next room was bigger, with 2 pianos facing each other. This was where the advanced students had their lessons. With Professor Williams. Elena had cleaned this room 1,000 times, and she knew every conversation that happened here. She knew which students were talented and which ones were just rich kids whose parents wanted them to look cultured. As she mopped the floor, Elena remembered listening to a lesson earlier that day. A girl had been playing Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 11, and Professor Williams kept stopping her. "Feel the music," he had said. "Don't just play the notes. Let the emotion flow through your fingers." The girl had tried again, but it still sounded mechanical, lifeless. Elena shook her head. Quietly. If only she could show that girl what Mozart really meant. But who would listen to a woman who cleaned toilets and emptied trash cans? She moved to the next room, where the walls were covered with pictures of famous pianists. There was Chopin, looking serious and romantic. There was Liszt, with his wild hair and intense eyes. And there, in a small frame in the corner, was a picture that always made Elena's heart skip a beat. It was a black and white photo of a beautiful woman sitting at a grand piano, her hands gracefully positioned over the keys. Isabel Morales Rodriguez. Her grandmother. Elena paused her cleaning and looked at the photo. Most people walking by wouldn't notice it, or if they did, they wouldn't know who it was. But Elena knew. Her grandmother had been one of the most respected pianists in Spain. Before the war changed everything. Elena could still remember sitting next to her grandmother on the old piano bench in their tiny apartment in Mexico City. She was only 6 years old then, her legs dangling and not even reaching the floor. Her grandmother's weathered hands would guide hers across the keys. "Music is not about showing off," her grandmother would say in Spanish, her voice soft but firm. "It's about telling a story. Every note has a purpose. Every silence has meaning. When you play, you must make people feel something they never felt before." Those lessons had lasted until Elena was 16. Every day after school, she would rush home to practice. Her grandmother had taught her everything: classical pieces, folk songs, even jazz arrangements she had learned in the nightclubs of Barcelona. Before the war, Elena's fingers had been magic on those keys. She could make that old, beaten-up piano sound like a concert grand. But then her grandmother got sick. The cancer came fast and took her away within 6 months. With her gone, there was no money for Elena to continue her music education. Her mother worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Elena's dreams of playing in concert halls faded away as she took on work to help support the family. That was 30 years ago. Elena had married young, moved to the United States, and worked whatever jobs she could find. When her husband left her with 2 small children, she had to work even harder. There was no time for music, no time for dreams. There was only survival. Now her children were grown and on their own. Her son was an engineer in California, and her daughter was a nurse in Texas. They had good lives, stable lives. Alina was proud of them, even if they didn't understand why she still worked as a cleaning lady when she could probably find something better. The truth was, Alina loved working at the music academy. It kept her close to the world she had lost. Every day, she heard young people learning the pieces she had once mastered. She heard teachers explaining techniques she had learned from one of the best pianists of her generation. It was both heartbreaking and comforting at the same time. Alina finished cleaning the practice rooms and moved to the main concert hall. This was her favorite part of the job. The hall was beautiful, with red velvet seats and a massive chandelier hanging from the ceiling. At the front of the room sat a magnificent Steinway grand piano, black and gleaming under the stage lights. She had permission to dust the piano, but she was never supposed to play it. That was for the students and teachers only. But sometimes, when she was sure nobody was around, Alina would sit on the bench and just touch the keys. She never played full songs, just little pieces of melodies that reminded her of her grandmother. Tonight was different, though. As Alina approached the piano with her dust cloth, she heard something that made her stop in her tracks. It was the security guard, Mr. Peterson, talking on his phone in the hallway. "Yeah, I know it's crazy," he was saying. "But Professor Richardson is desperate. The accompanist for next week's recital got in a car accident. They need someone who can play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto, No. 2, and they need them fast." Alina's breath caught in her throat. Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto. She knew that piece like she knew her own heartbeat. Her grandmother had played it countless times, and Alina had learned it by heart when she was just 14 years old. It was one of the most beautiful and challenging pieces ever written. Mr. Peterson's voice faded as he walked away, but Alina stood frozen by the piano. She looked around the empty hall, making sure she was completely alone. Then, almost without thinking, she sat down on the bench and placed her hands on the keys, very softly, so quiet that even someone standing right outside wouldn't hear. Alina began to play the opening notes of the concerto. Her fingers remembered every chord, every delicate passage, every powerful crescendo. For just a few minutes, she wasn't Alina the cleaning lady anymore. She was the pianist she had been born to be. When she finished, Alina quickly stood up and grabbed her dust cloth. Her heart was pounding, and her hands were shaking slightly. She looked around again, making sure nobody had heard her. Then she went back to her cleaning, trying to push away the music that was still singing in her head. Something had awakened inside her that night. After 30 years of silence, the music was calling her back. The next morning, Alina arrived at the academy earlier than usual. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had overheard the night before. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the piece that had made her grandmother cry every time she played. The piece that Alina herself had mastered as a teenager, pouring her heart into every note. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept wandering. As she cleaned the faculty lounge, she could hear Professor Richardson on the phone, his voice getting more frustrated with each call. "What do you mean you can't find anyone?" he was saying. "This is one of the most important recitals of the year. We have parents coming from all over the country. Some of these families donate thousands of dollars to this academy." Alina pretended to be busy organizing the coffee supplies, but she was listening to every word. Professor Richardson was the head of the piano department, a tall man with graying hair who always wore expensive suits. He had been at the academy for over 20 years and had a reputation for being very demanding. "I don't care if it's short notice," Professor Richardson continued into the phone. "We need a professional pianist who can handle Rachmaninoff. This isn't some simple accompaniment. This is one of the most challenging concertos ever written. Elena could hear him pacing around his office, his footsteps getting faster and more agitated. She had seen him stressed before, but never like this. Usually, Professor Richardson was calm and composed, speaking to everyone with the confidence of a man who had never faced a problem he couldn't solve. A few minutes later, Professor Richardson hung up the phone and let out a long sigh. Elena heard his office door open, and soon he was walking into the faculty lounge where she was working. "Good morning, Elena," he said, barely looking at her. He poured himself a cup of coffee with shaking hands. "Good morning, Professor Richardson." Elena replied quietly, continuing to wipe down the tables. She wanted to say something, anything, but what could she do? Tell him that the cleaning lady could play Rachmaninoff? He would think she was crazy. Or worse, he might think she was making fun of him during his moment of crisis. As the day went on, Elena could feel the tension building throughout the academy. Word had spread about the missing accompanist, and everyone was talking about it. Students were worried that their recital might be canceled. Teachers were making phone calls, trying to find someone, anyone, who could step in at the last minute. During lunch break, Elena was cleaning the main hallway when she overheard a conversation between Professor Richardson and Dr. Martinez, the academy's director. "We've called every professional pianist in the city," Professor Richardson was saying. "Either they're already booked, or they say it's too short notice to learn the piece properly." One pianist said she would need at least 2 months to prepare for something that challenging. Dr. Martinez, a kind woman in her 50s, looked worried. "What about the students? Any of our advanced students who could handle it?" Professor Richardson shook his head. "Rachmaninoff second is graduate level material. Our best students are still working on intermediate pieces. We would be setting them up for failure, and it would ruin the entire recital." Elena continued mopping, moving slowly so she could hear more of their conversation. "Maybe we should postpone the recital," Dr. Martinez suggested. "Explain the situation to the families." "Impossible," Professor Richardson replied firmly. "We have parents flying in from Europe for this. The Whitmore family themselves will be attending, and they're considering a major donation to build our new wing. If we cancel now, it will look completely unprofessional." Elena knew about the Whitmore family. They were the wealthy donors who had founded the academy 50 years ago. Their portrait hung in the main entrance, and there was a scholarship named after them. If they were coming to this recital, it was indeed a big deal. The two professors walked away, still talking in hushed, worried tones. Elena stood alone in the hallway, gripping her mop handle tightly. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes, Mia, life gives us chances to use our gifts, but we have to be brave enough to take them." Later that afternoon, Elena was cleaning the practice rooms when she heard the emergency faculty meeting being called. All the music teachers were gathering in the main conference room to discuss the crisis. Elena knew she shouldn't listen, but she couldn't help herself. She positioned her cleaning cart near the door and pretended to organize her supplies. Inside the room, she could hear Professor Richardson explaining the situation to the entire faculty. His voice sounded tired and defeated. "I've exhausted every option," he was saying. "Every professional pianist in the area is either unavailable or unwilling to take on such a challenging piece with only 1 week's notice. Unless someone has a miracle solution, we may have to cancel the recital." There was a long silence. Elena could imagine all the teachers looking at each other, hoping someone would have an answer. Then Professor Williams, the teacher Elena had heard giving lessons so many times, spoke up. "What if we simplified the program? Maybe chose a different concerto, something easier?" "The programs have already been printed," Professor Richardson replied. "More importantly, the student has been preparing this specific piece for months. Young David Chen has worked incredibly hard on this concerto. It would be devastating to tell him now that he can't perform it." Elena knew David. He was a talented 17-year-old who practiced for hours every day. She had heard him working on the Rachmaninoff concerto, and while he was good, she could tell he was still struggling with some of the more complex passages. He needed an accompanist who really understood the piece, someone who could support him and make him sound his best. The meeting continued for another hour, with various teachers suggesting ideas that were quickly shot down. Call the music schools in nearby cities. Ask retired professors to come out of retirement. Even contact piano students from the local university. But Elena knew what they didn't know. Finding someone who could play Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto wasn't just about technical skill. It was about understanding the soul of the music. It was about knowing how to make the piano sing with both power and tenderness. It was about having lived long enough to understand the deep emotions that Rachmaninoff had poured into every note. As the faculty meeting ended and the teachers began filing out, Elena heard Professor Richardson talking to Dr. Martinez again. "I feel like I'm letting everyone down," he was saying. "These students have worked so hard, and now their big moment might be ruined because I can't find one pianist." Dr. Martinez put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "It's not your fault, Robert. Sometimes these things just happen." Professor Richardson stopped walking and looked around the hallway, as if searching for inspiration. His eyes fell on Elena, who was pretending to clean the water fountain nearby. For a moment, their eyes met. Elena saw the desperation in his face, the weight of responsibility he was carrying. In that instant, she almost spoke up. The words were right there on her tongue. "I can play it." But then Professor Richardson looked away, and the moment passed. Elena went back to her cleaning, her heart pounding. She told herself she was being foolish. Even if she could convince them she could play the piece, what would people think? A cleaning lady performing in the Academy's most important recital of the year? It was ridiculous. But as Elena finished her work that day and prepared to go home, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. The music was calling to her again, just like it had the night before when she sat at that beautiful Steinway piano. She thought about David Chun, the young student who had worked so hard on his concerto. She thought about all the families who were planning to attend. She thought about her grandmother, who had always told her that music was meant to be shared, not hidden away. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop being invisible. Elena barely slept that night. She kept tossing and turning, hearing the notes of Rachmaninoff's concerto playing over and over in her head. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her grandmother's face, heard her voice saying, "Music is a gift. Mia, when you have a gift, you must use it to help others." The next morning, Elena arrived at work with dark circles under her eyes and her hands shaking slightly from too much coffee. She had made a decision during those sleepless hours, but now in the bright light of day, it seemed impossible. How could she, a simple cleaning woman, approach these educated professors and tell them she could solve their problem? As she pushed her cart down the familiar hallway, Elena noticed that the atmosphere at the Academy was even more tense than the day before. Students were whispering in worried groups. Teachers looked stressed and distracted. The crisis was affecting everyone. Elena started her morning routine in the practice rooms, but she kept hearing fragments of conversations that made her heart race. "My parents are flying in from Japan," she heard one student telling another. "If the recital gets canceled, they'll be so disappointed." In another room, a teacher was on the phone. "I understand you need more time to prepare, but we literally have 6 days left." 6 days! Elena's hands trembled as she dusted the piano in room 12. This was getting worse by the hour. She thought about David Chen, the young man who had worked so hard on the Rachmaninoff concerto. She had heard him practicing yesterday, and his playing had improved so much over the months. He deserved his chance to shine. Around noon, Elena was cleaning the faculty lounge when Professor Richardson walked in. He looked terrible. His usually perfectly styled hair was messy. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and there were worry lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. He sat down heavily in one of the chairs and put his head in his hands. Elena continued wiping down the tables, pretending not to notice his distress, but her heart was breaking for him. She had worked at the academy long enough to know that Professor Richardson truly cared about his students. This wasn't just about his reputation. It was about not letting down the young people who trusted him. "Elena," Professor Richardson said suddenly, looking up at her. "You've been here for 3 years, right? You must have heard a lot of music lessons." Elena stopped cleaning and looked at him nervously. "Yes, sir. I hear the students practicing every day." Professor Richardson managed a weak smile. "Sometimes I wonder if you know more about music than some of our students do, just from listening all the time." Elena's heart started beating faster. Was this her chance? Should she say something? But before she could find the courage to speak, Professor Richardson's phone rang, and he was back to making desperate calls to find a pianist. The rest of the day passed in a blur of overheard conversations and mounting panic. Elena finished her cleaning and was about to leave when she heard voices coming from the main concert hall. She recognized Professor Richardson's voice, along with Dr. Martinez and several other faculty members. Against her better judgment, Elena quietly approached the hall and peered through the partially open door. The professors were standing on the stage, looking defeated. Professor Richardson was holding a piece of paper, probably a list of all the pianists he had tried to contact. "That was the last one," Professor Richardson was saying. "The conservatory in Springfield can't help us either. Their best pianist is recovering from hand surgery." Dr. Martinez sighed deeply. "I think we need to face reality, Robert. We're going to have to cancel the recital and reschedule it for next month." "But the Whitmore family ... double quotes Professor Richardson started. "We'll understand," Dr. Martinez finished. "These things happen. We'll explain the situation and..." "No," Elena said quietly. The word had slipped out before she could stop herself. All the professors turned toward the door, surprised to see her standing there. "I'm sorry," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just ... I was just finishing my cleaning." Professor Richardson walked toward her, looking confused. "Elena, did you say something?" Elena's mouth went dry. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything, or make her look like a complete fool. She thought about her grandmother one more time, about all those years of lessons, about the music that had been sleeping inside her for 30 years. "I said no," Elena repeated, a little louder this time. "You don't have to cancel the recital." The professors looked at each other, clearly not understanding what she meant. Dr. Martinez spoke gently. "Elena, I know you care about the students, but this is a very complicated situation. We need a professional pianist who can play extremely difficult music." Elena took a deep breath and stepped into the concert hall. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to keep walking until she was standing in front of all these educated, important people. "I can play it," she said simply. There was a moment of complete silence. Then Professor Richardson let out a nervous laugh. "Elena, that's very sweet of you to offer, but this isn't like playing Happy Birthday on a keyboard. This is Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto, No. 2. It's one of the most challenging pieces in all of classical music." Elena felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment, but she didn't back down. "I know what piece it is, Professor. I've known it since I was 14 years old." The professors exchanged glances. Elena could see them trying to figure out how to let her down gently without hurting her feelings. Professor Williams, the teacher Elena had heard giving so many lessons, stepped forward. "Elena, have you ever had piano lessons?" "Yes," Elena said quietly. "My grandmother taught me." "And where did your grandmother learn?" Dr. Martinez asked kindly. clearly trying to be encouraging. Alina straightened her shoulders. The Barcelona Conservatory, before the war. This got their attention. The Barcelona Conservatory was one of the most prestigious music schools in Europe. Professor Richardson's expression changed slightly. What was your grandmother's name? Isabel Morales Rodriguez, Alina said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about the woman who had meant everything to her. Professor Richardson's eyes widened. He walked quickly to the side of the stage where there was a bookshelf filled with music history books. He pulled out a thick volume and flipped through the pages rapidly. Isabel Morales Rodriguez, he read aloud. Spanish pianist, born 1920, studied at the Barcelona Conservatory under Professor Antonio Vega, known for her exceptional interpretations of Romantic period composers, particularly Chopin and Rachmaninoff. Performed throughout Spain and France. Before immigrating to Mexico in 1947, the other professors gathered around the book, reading over Professor Richardson's shoulder. Alina stood quietly, watching their faces change as they realized she wasn't just making up stories. Alina, Dr. Martinez said slowly, your grandmother was Isabel Morales Rodriguez? The Isabel Morales Rodriguez? Alina nodded. She taught me everything she knew. Every day after school for 10 years, until she got sick. Professor Richardson closed the book and looked at Alina with new eyes. And you're saying you can play Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto? Yes, sir, I know every note. The professors looked at each other again, but this time their expressions were different. Instead of polite dismissal, Alina could see curiosity. And maybe even a tiny bit of hope. Professor Williams cleared his throat. Alina, even if you learned this piece years ago, it's extremely physically demanding. And performing with an orchestra in front of hundreds of people. That's very different from playing alone. Alina thought about all the nights she had dreamed of playing on a real stage, all the time she had imagined what it would feel like to share her music with an audience. I understand it's difficult, she said. But I've been listening to David practice this concerto for months. I know exactly how it should sound with the orchestra. I know where he needs support, where the piano should lead, and where it should follow. Professor Richardson was staring at her intently. You've been listening to David's lessons? I listen. To all the lessons, Alina admitted. I can't help it. When you love music, you absorb it everywhere you go. There was another long silence. Alina could practically hear the professors thinking, weighing their options. Finally, Professor Richardson spoke. Alina, I'm going to be completely honest with you. Right now, you're our only option. But if we let you try, and it doesn't work out, we'll have to cancel the recital anyway. Are you absolutely certain you can do this? Alina looked around the beautiful concert hall, at the stage where so many talented musicians had performed. She thought about her grandmother, who had played in halls like this in Spain. She thought about David and all the other students who deserved their moment to shine. Yes, she said firmly. I can do this. The next evening, Alina stood outside the concert hall door, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had spent the entire day in a daze, barely able to focus on her cleaning duties. Now at 6 p.m., it was time to prove whether she was telling the truth or living in a fantasy. Professor Richardson had scheduled what he called a brief assessment for after hours, when no students would be around. Alina knew what that really meant. They expected her to sit down, play a few simple notes, realize she was out of her depth, and quietly disappear back to her cleaning duties. They were being kind, giving her a private moment to fail without embarrassing herself in front of others. Alina pushed open the heavy door and stepped into the concert hall. The same professors from yesterday were already there, sitting in the front row. Professor Richardson, Dr. Martinez, Professor Williams, and two others she recognized but had never spoken to. They all looked uncomfortable, like people attending a funeral they didn't want to be at. The stage lights were on, casting a warm glow over the magnificent Steinway grand piano. Elena had cleaned around that piano hundreds of times, but she had never sat at it properly. Now it waited for her like an old friend she hadn't seen in 30 years. "Thank you for coming, Elena," Professor Richardson said, standing up. His voice was gentle but formal. "We really appreciate you wanting to help. We thought we'd just have you play a little bit, see how comfortable you are with the piano." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice to work properly. She walked slowly toward the stage, her cleaning uniform feeling completely out of place in this elegant setting. Her worn sneakers squeaked softly against the polished floor, the sound echoing in the quiet hall. Professor Williams leaned over to whisper something to Dr. Martinez. Elena couldn't hear the words, but she could guess what they were saying. "Poor woman, probably hasn't touched a piano in decades. This is going to be painful to watch." Elena climbed the steps to the stage, each step feeling like a mountain. The piano bench looked both familiar and foreign at the same time. She had dreamed of sitting at a bench like this for so many years, but never under these circumstances. "Just play whatever you're comfortable with," Professor Richardson called from his seat. "Don't worry about being perfect. We just want to get a sense of your abilities." Elena sat down on the bench and adjusted the height slightly. The professors were watching her every move, probably looking for signs that she had no idea what she was doing. She placed her hands on the keys and immediately felt a shock of recognition. These keys were perfectly weighted, responsive to the slightest touch. This was a real piano, the kind her grandmother had told her about, but Elena had never had the chance to play. For a moment, Elena just sat there, her hands resting on the keys. The hall was completely silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. She could feel the professors getting more uncomfortable, probably wondering how long they should let this continue before gently telling her it wasn't going to work. Elena closed her eyes and thought about her grandmother. She remembered those afternoon lessons in their tiny apartment, the old upright piano with half the keys sticking and a pedal that squeaked. She remembered her grandmother's patient voice. "Don't think about the people watching, Mia. Think about the story you want to tell. Let the music speak for itself." Elena opened her eyes and placed her fingers in position. Then, very softly, she began to play the opening measures of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto. "No. 2. The first notes floated through the hall like whispers. Elena could feel the professors lean forward in their seats, surprised that she actually knew how to begin the piece. But these were just the simple opening notes. Anyone could learn those with a few hours of practice. Elena continued, her fingers finding their way through the gentle melody that opened the concerto. Her touch was light, careful, as if she was testing both herself and the instrument. The piano responded beautifully, each note clear and pure. Then came the first challenging passage, where the melody began to build and the harmonies became more complex. This was where most amateur pianists would start to struggle, where the technical demands would reveal their limitations. Elena's hands moved smoothly across the keys, navigating the intricate runs and chord progressions as if they were second nature. The professors stopped whispering among themselves. The hall grew even quieter, as if everyone was holding their breath. But Elena was just getting started. As the piece progressed, she began to let go of her fear, her self-doubt, her worry about what these important people might think. The music was taking over, the way it always had when she was young. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence, her whole body beginning to sway slightly with the rhythm. The gentle opening section gave way to the more dramatic middle passage, where Rachmaninoff demanded both power and precision from the pianist. Elena's hands flew across the keys, her left hand providing a rich, rolling accompaniment while her right hand sang out the soaring melody. The sound filled the entire hall, rich and full and absolutely breathtaking. Professor Richardson's mouth had fallen open. He was staring at Elena as if he was seeing a ghost. Next to him, Dr. Martinez had tears in her eyes. Professor Williams was gripping the armrests of his chair, completely transfixed. Elena was no longer aware of her audience. She was lost in the music, in the story that Rachmaninoff had written over a century ago. This was a piece about struggle and triumph, about finding beauty in the midst of pain. It was a piece that spoke to Elena's own life, her own journey from dreams to disappointment, to this impossible second chance. As she played, Elena could hear her grandmother's voice guiding her. More feeling in this passage, Mia. This is where the composer's heart is breaking. Make them feel it too. And Elena did make them feel it. She poured 30 years of suppressed musical passion into every note, every phrase, every delicate ornament. The challenging technical passages that would have intimidated professional pianists seemed effortless under Elena's fingers. Her hands had grown older, but they remembered everything. The muscle memory was still there, waiting patiently all these years for this moment. Elena played through the most difficult section of the piece, where cascading runs and complex rhythms created a musical whirlwind. Her fingers never stumbled, never hesitated. She navigated every challenge with the skill and artistry of someone who had been born to play this music. The professor sat in stunned silence, hardly daring to breathe. This wasn't just competent playing. This wasn't even just good playing. This was extraordinary. This was the kind of musical interpretation that brought audiences to their feet in the world's greatest concert halls. As Elena approached the final section of the excerpt she had chosen to play, she gradually brought the volume down, returning to the gentle contemplative mood of the opening. Her touch became lighter, more delicate, as if she was sharing a secret with each person in the audience. The last notes hung in the air for a long moment, after Elena lifted her hands from the keys. The silence that followed was profound, almost sacred. Elena sat quietly on the bench, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for the professors to say something, anything. Professor Richardson was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Elena. Who are you? Elena turned on the bench to face them, her cheeks flushed from the intensity of playing. I'm Elena Rodriguez, she said simply. I work here. I clean the practice rooms and empty the trash cans. Dr. Martinez shook her head slowly. No, you don't. You're a pianist. You're a real pianist. Professor Williams stood up from his chair, his legs unsteady. Elena, what you just played, that was professional level. That was conservatory level. That was... He struggled to find words. That was beautiful beyond description. Elena felt tears starting to form in her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had heard her play, so long since she had been able to share the music that lived inside her heart. My grandmother taught me well, Elena said quietly. She always said that music never leaves you, even when life takes you away from it. Professor Richardson walked slowly toward the stage, as if he was approaching something sacred. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Can you really play the entire concerto? Not just this section, but all 3 movements? Elena nodded. Yes, Professor. I know every note. I've known it for 30 years. The professors looked at each other, and Elena could see a mixture of amazement, excitement, and disbelief in their faces. Elena, Dr. Martinez said, her voice filled with emotion, would you be willing to perform this concerto with David Chun at next week's recital? Elena looked out at the empty seats of the concert hall, imagining them filled with families, students, and music lovers. She thought about David, who had worked so hard to prepare for this moment. She thought about her grandmother, who would have been so proud to see her playing on a stage like this. Yes, Elena said firmly. I would be honored. The week leading up to the recital passed like a dream Elena wasn't sure she wanted to wake up from. Word had spread quickly through the academy about the mysterious cleaning lady who could play Rachmaninoff. though the professors had asked everyone to keep the news quiet. Until after the performance, Elena found herself in the strangest position of her life. During the day, she still pushed her cleaning cart through the hallways and emptied trash cans. But in the evenings, she was rehearsing with David Chun and the Academy's small orchestra, preparing for what Professor Richardson was calling the performance of the decade. David had been shocked when he first learned that his accompanist would be the woman who cleaned his practice room. But after their first rehearsal together, all his doubts disappeared. Elena didn't just play the piano part. She understood exactly how to support his performance, when to lead and when to follow, how to make his playing sound even better than it was. "You make me sound like a real pianist," David told her after their third rehearsal, his face glowing with excitement. Elena smiled at the 17-year-old boy, who reminded her so much of herself at that age. "Full of passion and dreams, you are a real pianist, David. You just needed someone to believe in you." The day of the recital arrived with unusually warm weather for late autumn. Elena woke up in her small apartment and for a moment wondered if the whole thing had been an elaborate dream. But there, hanging on her closet door, was the elegant black dress that Dr. Martinez had helped her pick out. It was simple but beautiful, the kind of dress a professional pianist might wear. Elena arrived at the Academy 3 hours before the performance. The building was buzzing with activity as students prepared for their various pieces. Families began arriving, and the technical crew set up lights and sound equipment in the main concert hall. Elena could see workers setting up hundreds of chairs. The Whitmore family had indeed come from their estate in Connecticut, along with several other major donors and music critics from the city's newspapers. This wasn't just a school recital anymore. It had become a significant cultural event. Elena went to the small practice room that had been reserved for her to warm up. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from nerves about playing the music, but from the magnitude of what was happening. After 30 years of silence, she was about to perform in front of hundreds of people. As she began playing scales to loosen up her fingers, Elena heard a soft knock on the door. Dr. Martinez peered in, looking elegant in a navy blue dress. "How are you feeling, Elena?" she asked gently. "Scared," Elena admitted, "but also excited. I never thought I would have this chance again." Dr. Martinez sat down beside her on the piano bench. "Elena, I want you to know something. Regardless of what happens tonight, you've already given us all a gift. You've reminded us that music isn't about degrees or fancy schools or expensive lessons. It's about passion, dedication, and the courage to share your heart with others." Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Dr. Martinez, can I ask you something? What will happen after tonight? Will I go back to being just the cleaning lady?" Dr. Martinez smiled. "Elena, after tonight, you'll never be just anything again. But we'll talk about your future tomorrow. Tonight, just focus on the music." As the evening progressed, Elena watched from the wings as student after student performed their pieces. There were violinists and flutists, singers and other pianists. All of them were talented, but Elena could hear the difference between technical skill and true musical understanding. Finally, it was time for the evening's main event. Professor Richardson walked onto the stage to introduce the performance of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, "tonight we have a very special performance for you. Our soloist is David Chun, a remarkable young pianist who has been preparing this challenging concerto for the past year." The audience applauded as David walked onto the stage, looking handsome in his black tuxedo, but clearly nervous. "David will be accompanied by our Academy Orchestra," Professor Richardson continued, "and tonight we have a guest pianist joining us. Elena Rodriguez has graciously agreed to perform the piano accompaniment for this magnificent concerto." Elena took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. She could hear murmurs from the audience as they saw her. She knew what they were thinking. Who was this woman they had never heard of? Why wasn't she listed in the program? As Alina sat down at the piano, she caught sight of her reflection in the glossy black surface of the instrument. The woman looking back at her looked confident, poised, ready. It was hard to believe this was the same person who had been emptying trash cans just a few hours earlier. The conductor raised his baton, and the orchestra began the opening measures of the concerto. Alina counted the beats, waiting for her entrance. When the moment came, she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. From the very first notes, something magical happened in that concert hall. Alina's playing wasn't just technically perfect. It was deeply moving, full of emotion and understanding that could only come from years of life experience. The music flowed from her fingers like a story being told, each phrase carefully shaped and beautifully expressed. David responded to Elena's playing like a flower opening to the sun. With such strong supportive accompaniment, he played better than he ever had before. His tone became richer, his phrasing more confident, his technical passages cleaner and more precise. The audience, which had been politely attentive at the beginning, gradually became completely captivated. People stopped looking at their programs. Conversations ceased. Even the restless children in the back rows sat still, somehow sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Elena lost herself in the music, just as she had during her audition. This was Rachmaninoff at his most passionate and beautiful. Music that spoke of longing and triumph, of dreams deferred and finally realized. As she played, Alina thought about her grandmother, about all the years of cleaning offices and raising children, about the music that had waited patiently inside her heart for this moment. During the second movement, the beautiful slow section that showcased the piano's lyrical qualities, Alina could see people in the audience wiping away tears. Her playing was so expressive, so full of genuine emotion, that it touched something deep inside everyone who heard it. The third movement brought the concerto to its thrilling conclusion, with rapid passages and powerful chords that demanded both technical skill and musical maturity. Alina and David played together like they had been partners for years, supporting each other through every challenging section, building to a climax that left the entire audience breathless. As the final chords rang out, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience erupted into the most enthusiastic applause Alina had ever heard. People jumped to their feet, clapping and cheering with genuine emotion. David was beaming, taking bow after bow as the applause continued. But something unexpected was happening. More and more people in the audience were turning their attention to Alina. They had come to hear a student recital, but they had witnessed something much more significant. Word was already spreading through the crowd. Who is this pianist? Where did she come from? How had they never heard of her before? Professor Richardson returned to the stage with tears in his eyes. He gestured for quiet, though the applause continued for several more minutes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion, "I think you'll agree that we've just witnessed something truly special. David Chun, our remarkable student soloist." More applause for David, who was glowing with pride and accomplishment. "And," Professor Richardson continued, "Elena Rodriguez, whose extraordinary musical gifts have blessed us all tonight." The applause for Elena was thunderous. People were standing, calling out, "Bravo," and more. She had never experienced anything like this in her life. As Elena walked off the stage, she was surrounded by people wanting to congratulate her, to ask her questions, to understand how someone so talented had remained unknown for so long. Among the crowd, she spotted Mrs. Whitmore herself, the elderly woman whose family had founded the academy. "My dear," Mrs. Whitmore said, taking Elena's hands in hers, "that was the most beautiful performance I've heard in this hall in 50 years. You have a rare and precious gift." Over the following weeks, Elena's life changed in ways she never could have imagined. The local newspaper ran a story about her performance, calling her the hidden maestro who emerged from the shadows to save the day. A recording someone had made on their phone went viral on social media, bringing Elena's story to people around the world. But the most important change was within the academy itself. Professor Richardson and Dr. Martinez offered Elena a full scholarship to complete her formal music education. More than that, they invited her to join the faculty as a piano instructor, recognizing that her unique combination of technical skill and life experience made her an exceptional teacher. Elena accepted both offers. She would continue working at the academy, but now as Professor Elena Rodriguez instead of Elena the cleaning lady. Her first students would be adults who, like her, had put their musical dreams on hold for practical concerns. She would show them that it's never too late to reclaim the